We are ready and waiting for you now. If it's a fight that you dare see, we've acquired our strength through pain. No more are we pathetic again. You are the reason why we claim that we've all become this way. And I regret this prison that I created for myself.
Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Lou Mavs here. This is the Music is Life podcast. Thank you for watching it on YouTube. Thank you for listening to it on all available streaming media platforms. If you're a fan of the Rat Salad Review Network, thanks so much for your support. I recently interviewed General George Fullan, who used to own General Studios in Douglaston and who recorded many albums at Pie Studios in Glen Cove. George is someone I'm proud to call a friend. We had a recent conversation which lasted about 3+ hours. So it's a long one. I had to break it up a little bit on my MacBook because, I edit everything on iMovie and I bump everything so that the audio can go on Anchor and the video can go on YouTube. And in that 3+ hours of conversation, there was a lot of stuff that was talked about that I didn't want people to miss out on hearing. The only thing is, as much as I love George, I understand human nature and the human attention span. So what I'm going to do with this episode is I'm going to break it up to 3 parts, and you're going to either be watching or listening to part 1 right now. And over the next couple of weeks, I'll definitely upload parts 2 and 3. By the time you're watching this, it's possible they may already be up. Can't make any promises. What's the old line in business? Under promise and over deliver. But it was a blast talking with George. I haven't seen him in a very long time. Actually, the last time I saw him in person, I went to his mother's funeral. Last time we saw each other before that, I recorded with him my old band, The Rebel Medium, the band that you hear in the intro every episode. And that was a wonderful experience recording with him because the song that you hear in the intro, Lose Control, is a song that I co-wrote with Jackie Weissert, who was the lead singer, rhythm guitar player, primary songwriter. So I'm very proud of that. I'm looking forward to reading your comments or suggestions, and just want to say thank you, George, for a great 3-hour talk, and I hope you enjoy it. So here's part 1 of my discussion with General George Fullan. Enjoy. Music is Live podcast, your host Lou Mavs, here on YouTube on the Music is Live podcast channel, also available on all available audio platforms where you can download your podcasts, including Apple, Google, Amazon, apparently now Pandora, which is cool. And I'm really happy to say that I am joined today by a very special guest. He is someone that I've had the pleasure of working with in the past on music in various genres. He is someone that I consider a very close friend, practically family. It's crazy because here we are the past year. Pandemic has kept a lot of people apart, but I actually got back in touch with him again during the pandemic. So I'm happy to say that he is here on the show tonight, and we're going to discuss his history in the hardcore scene, his history in music, and what he's doing right now, and just catching up and shooting the shit. I'm really proud to say that I have my General George Fullan, in the house. Well, in his house, and I'm in my house, but we're here doing the podcast tonight. And let it be known that I know how to butcher a last name better than anybody. George, I'm sorry. It's not George Fullan. It's George Fullan. But no matter what, still the General.
In the Zoom house. Well, thank you for asking me to do it, and I hope I don't disappoint.
Nah, you never disappoint. Please. Everything that I've done with you has been gold, and I'm sure this is going to be great. And, can't thank you enough for being a part of it. You're the first producer / engineer I've had on the show. And I'm glad that you're the first one, considering we've worked very close together with my wife, Erin Michelle, and with the Rebel Medium. And I've heard a lot of the other work that you've done. So a lot of questions to ask you, especially with, again, as I mentioned, us being in a pandemic right now, and the option of music itself being a career path that one would undertake, which may be lucrative, may not be lucrative, but again, it's always a matter of what reasons are you doing it for. And I learned a lot with you. And like anything, the more you speak to people, the more you learn and the better you could become. That's my primary reason for even doing this podcast in the first place. And again, thanks for being a part of it, George.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. So, little background on you, where you're from, and what life was like for you growing up, and what got you into music in the first place.
I grew up in Amityville. I'm the youngest of 7. If you want to talk about what life was like, that maybe is another podcast called Therapy.
Oh, there's okay.
Yeah, the same. Parents divorced when I was 5. Didn't have a lot of contact with my dad until a couple of years ago, and raised by my mom and my sisters. The normal dysfunctional Long Island utopian family. Actually, at that point, like, one of my sisters really gave me my love for music. I have to say that she probably had the most influence on me in my younger years, and was always playing music for me, all different kinds of music. She was really into the Grateful Dead. So
Mhm.
she played a lot of Dead, and she would leave, 16, 17 years old. She would leave during the summers and kind of tour with the Dead. And it kind of showed me, like, oh, that music can be part of your life, to the point where, like, you go camping for 3 weeks on the road with your friends, and you're around music the whole time, and music is the center of that universe,
Mhm.
which then, like, weirdly led into my years in the hardcore scene, and like how many shows and all that stuff I ended up going to in my younger years.
Mhm.
So early on, I started listening to metal and all that stuff. Me and my best friend Ed Reyes, I ended up being in a band with called Clockwise, and then he ended up starting half the popular bands on Long Island. Ed Reyes, he started and put together Mind Over Matter, and that's a pretty big thing. And then kind of put all the members together,
Mhm.
and then they, did what they did. He left Mind Over Matter, and then started a band called No Thought, which then became Clockwise when I started singing. While in Clockwise, he kept showing up with these songs that were too light for me to sing on, because I'm a gruffy singer and I wasn't talented enough to sing on these songs. So he went and started a band called Inside, and then Inside kind of took off. And then he left Inside after Clockwise broke up. He went and started the Movie Life and put the Movie Life together. And then after he got left
That
out
I
of the
did
Movie
not
Life,
know.
yeah, after he left the Movie Life, he then started a band that ended up being Taking Back Sunday eventually. And
Never
then
heard of them.
Taking Back Sunday took off. So, and Taking Back Sunday, probably one of the more popular bands to come out of, and I still consider that Taking Back Sunday came out of the Long Island hardcore scene, because they did. Like, we were all hardcore back then. We were all hardcore kids. They were really, really at the forefront of the popularity of emo that swept through the country.
I'd have to say on the East Coast, it was probably Take It Back Sunday from Long Island, Thursday from New Jersey, and on the West Coast side, probably Thrice. I remember those were
Yeah.
probably the 3
Well,
biggest
then,
bands in the early 2000s,
yeah,
to me
and
at
then My
least.
Chemical Romance, that then really kind of like took the torch and made emo a household name to me. Like, once the major label machine came by and put that thing behind My Chem, it was like,
Yeah, MCR definitely took it to like a Queen level in terms of like their production and in terms of their show. And I respect and love those bands. I mean, it's funny because like I talk about my love for metal, I talk about my love for hardcore on this podcast, but it's funny. I never understood the term emo, because to me it's like it's hardcore that has a very positive usage of melody in it. And
yeah,
I think for it to be called emo, it's kind of like, no, it's punk or it's hardcore. Some of it's metal influence, some of it is, folk influence. I mean, it's just good music.
yeah,
Like I never understood that, and it's to me, it's like later on when after we had started working together, there was the scene kids thing where like the emo thing just like took on a whole different life, and I couldn't
yeah,
relate to that.
yeah. I mean, to me, early on, like, I started hearing the word emo in early 90s, like 90, 91, with Fugazi, because no one knew how to categorize Fugazi,
Or Rites of
you know,
Spring, yeah,
or
that was
Rites of
another band.
Spring. And Rites of Spring, maybe the first time I heard, it's like, oh, it's emotional hardcore. And I was like, what? And then it kind of sort of got shortened. And then even Quicksand got looped into that a little bit, because it's like, oh, they're emotional hardcore. And it was like, until post-hardcore. And then Sunny Day Real Estate kind of came out and everyone's like, this is emo. And I was like, okay. It was just all the post-hardcore stuff, like all the stuff that came out of the 80s, thrashed influenced hardcore. Because hardcore was Black Flag and, Bad Brains and Minor Threat. To me, that was like the hardcore stuff. And then got pushed towards, metal because of commercialism, I think in the late 80s. Where metal got really popular, like with Metallica, Megadeth, and stuff, and you had these labels kind of like looking for the next big thing, and they were picking up hardcore bands and kind of making it more into thrash. Which then you had the crossover stuff like DRI and all that stuff, which I didn't love that much. And then you had the sort of the older punk rockers like 7 Seconds, older punk rockers in the late 70s, getting in the late 80s, kind of putting out music. 7 Seconds put out Soul Force Revolution, which is like 7 Seconds meets U2. Still today, one of my favorite records of all time is Soul Force Revolution from 7 Seconds. And I think that came out in 87 because they were going the other way. They weren't getting heavier. They weren't chasing anything. They were just getting lighter and more mature in songwriting. And that came out with this punk influence. And I think that and Dag Nasty, a band like Dag Nasty that, kind of started sounding like Minor Threat, had members from Minor Threat in it. And then by the late 80s, kind of putting out stuff like We Got It Dankos that was like really melodic, not even really hardcore, but just more melodic. And I think that's the stuff. That's the stuff that influenced me and Ed to do Clockwise. Was the melodic records of those bands. Saw 7 Seconds in 90 or 91 or something, were blown away by it. And then bought the current records at that time and were like, wow, this doesn't sound punk at all. Like 7 Seconds is supposed to be a punk band. It's like, what is this? This is great songwriting. And it's like all that like the older guys doing this new melodic or even heavier, but still melodic stuff like a Quicksand or a Burn were just like blowing us away. And then when it came time to do Clockwise, it was like, let's write riffs like that. Let's write a chuggy part with a singy part over it, or some kind of other melodic or octaves or something on a guitar. And it really turned into that. And I think that was like the foundation of emo. Even my mom, who saw Taking Back Sunday later on, was like, oh, Ed's just doing the same stuff. He's playing the same music, but he's got a better looking singer now. I used to sing for Clockwise, so that was the joke. But so that's that. But to go back to the stuff, me and Ed, were 12 years old listening to Motley Crue and Metallica and all that stuff. And then somebody was like, you can go see these bands live. And when we were like 14 in 1987, we had faked our IDs so we could be 16, which was a friend of ours had the same typewriter that looked like our birth certificate numbers.
Okay.
So we went to the library, photocopied our birth certificate, took whited out the year we were born, and then photocopied that. Went to my friend's typewriter, made a bunch of photocopies of that because we had to get it right. Went to my friend's typewriter. He typed in a new year. We then went and photocopied that, and then we folded it up and brought that to the club and said, my mom won't let me leave with the real, like, I'm getting my license soon, but my wife won't let. We would tell the story to the bouncers every week until the point they would see us with this folded up copied birth certificate and they'd be like, come in. Because by the time we were 15, we had gone to so many shows at this club called Sundance in Bayshore that we knew the bouncers.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where like a huge fight would break out and the bouncers would protect us, or a huge fight break out that we would be involved in and the bouncers would put us to the side. And then when the fight stopped from happening, they would, like I have to say, I probably got into fights with 30-year-old dudes, and I was 15, and I was like, thought I was fucking fighting them and doing crazy shit like that when I was like 15, 16 years old.
I think the last fight that I got into at a show, I went to go see Anthrax at the Paramount 10 years ago with Testament, Death Angel.
Ooh, Death Angel. I've gotten into fights at Death Angel shows.
Yeah, so my buddy Alan and I, we pushed our ways to the front. When it got to a point where we reached a certain age, we weren't moshers. We were like, no, we
Yeah,
want to stay in the front. But the problem with the Paramount is that, you could crowd surf and they won't stop you.
yeah.
So I remember this friggin' jackass who looked like he still lived in his mother's basement with his big Doc Martin boot decided to friggin' step on my head, push my neck against the guardrail. And then I just went into Hulk mode. I just threw him off me into the front of the guardrail. As soon as he got up, I decked him in the face. And then he was he was gunning for me. Then Alan's
Yeah.
like, duck down, duck down. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm not bringing you a dead body home to your wife. Just duck down. And I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to push myself to the front anymore. It shows, but
Yeah.
there's always got to be one schmuck to ruin it for everybody. So I completely understand that. And, it's funny that you're talking about like all the effort that you put into the fake IDs to go into shows. This was before they started doing all ages or.
So this was at a we mainly started going to shows at this place called Sundance because it was like, whatever the Long Island Rock magazine would advertise shows.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd get a whole lineup. Like the old days were like looking through the Village Voice or whatever.
Yeah, I think Good Times is like the last magazine that does that, although there hasn't been any shows.
It might have been Good Times back in the day. So like we'd find Good Times at like, Uncle Phil's record store. Or like we used to go to we used to take the train to Valley Stream. So we grew up in Adville's South Shore. We take the South Shore line to Valley Stream and go record shopping at Slip Discs in Valley Stream. And I have to say, like, that's if it wasn't for those folks at Slip Disc, like I might be listening to different music right now. Because it would just be like, oh, I like this, and it'd be like, well, then have this. It's like, have this, have this. Like we listen to so many bands, and like, we would show up there, like bands would stop and sign stuff, and like Ed was really into getting autographs and stuff like that, so we'd go with him and he'd get like his jacket signed or something like that. And then you'd find out about a show, like, we saw, and this is probably when I was 16 or 17, because I think I drove to the show, but we saw Sepultura at this place Sundance in front of like 18 people, like their first US tour. Yeah. And then I think they slept at our friend's house.
Oh.
So like, there's just, there's stuff like that like we just were so into metal back then, and then slowly, transitioned into hardcore. But we were like little metalheads. My hair was down to the middle of my back. I was 16. I couldn't wait to get my license. But back in the day, we used to take the train. I'd go to Annabelle train station, hop on a train, go to Bayshore, walk through a pretty horrible neighborhood, but I grew up in a pretty horrible neighborhood, so I knew what to do. And then go to these shows and then not come home until like we would catch the 7:00 train in the morning on the way home.
Oh, geez.
Because the shows would end at 3 a.m. Like, it was like he slept at my house, I slept at his house kind of thing. It was, to go to these shows, and like his neighbor who had the typewriter was a little bit older than us. So he got his license when we were 15. And then that was it. We were at Sundance every weekend.
I'm guessing this is pre-union hours. The same friend of mine that I went to Anthrax and Testament with, he went to go see Dream Theater play at Radio City Music Hall when they did their score show.
I'm sorry.
We'll get into the story of that later. Yeah. But he said that Dream Theater ended 2 minutes late, and apparently I think they owed the union $30,000 in overtime fees.
Yeah. No, this wasn't New York City. This was Bayshore on in Long Island.
So Long Island went by different rules. Yeah.
Yeah, there would be 5 bands, and the show would start at 10 o'clock at night.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was like normal. It was like a rock club. It probably fit, legally probably fit 350 people in it. Illegally, it was 500.
Lemoore in Brooklyn was like that too, right? Where like the headlining act would go on 2 a.m.
Yeah, it was just like Lemoore's. The whole structure, all that stuff. It was a B market club. So.
Yeah, but it sounds like Sundance and Lemoore always sounded like they had the best bands there. Like, I mean, to have been alive at that time, it would have been great.
I think in '88 we went to go see Slayer, and it was like, almost a riot broke out. Cops came with dogs. It was like
that doesn't surprise me. It being Slayer in 1988, probably, yeah.
But I saw Dark Angel there. I saw mean, I saw one of the best shows of my life there, which was Faith No More before they got popular, before they had that hit song.
So was Chuck Mosley the singer at the time?
I think it was just Patton. Who
Okay.
just started singing. They opened the show. Then this band called Soundgarden went on.
Never heard of them either.
Yeah, and I sound like such a dick saying that, but like I never heard of them, and I was blown away by them because I just had never heard anything like it. And they weren't playing their slow, crappy music; they were playing this fast but sludgy kind of stuff. And he was going nuts. He broke the roof off. Bouncer almost beat him up. He broke the ceiling above the stage because he was like, there was feedback. They were playing so loud they couldn't get his mic loud enough on stage for him. So he was like,
well, yeah, he belted the fuck out of his vocals back then. Yeah.
And then Voivod went on, and we were there to see Voivod. And I have to say that Voivod show is in my top 5 favorite shows. Like Soundgarden and Faith No More did not have to play. Fucking Voivod was one of the best shows I ever saw, and the energy of the crowd was great. No one fought. Like it just was this amazing feeling to see Voivod.
Time out. Voivod, Soundgarden, and Faith No More all on the same
Voivod
bill.
headlined, and it sold out, and the place was fucking packed.
I would have loved to have honestly been a fly on the wall there. Holy shit.
That was probably 90 or 91.
Probably. So this was okay. So wow.
I could always go back. Like I could look up when Faith No More had that hit and then go back 6 months.
No, I believe it. And honestly, I love all 3 bands. And just to say, just to hear that you saw that, I feel so cheated. Like I was just like, why didn't my parents conceive at an earlier time? Anyway.
Yeah.
Because I have an embarrassing thing that I have to admit is that, I mean, me being born in 1980, I didn't discover hardcore until about 96. And that was around the time that I was listening to bands like Quicksand and Orange 9mm. And I love those bands, but then I was like,
yeah. What a great thing to get into. It took me years of listening to hardcore for those bands to start happening.
Right, and you remember when Walter from Quicksand was in Gorilla Biscuits, Shaka from 09 was in Burn, and here I am discovering.
Burn. I saw Burn. I saw Gorilla Biscuits.
Right, and here I am discovering them at not. I don't know if I would say the apex or the crux of their career, but I mean right when they were starting to like really take off, and here I am now going back and discovering where they came from. And then I went out and bought my first hardcore CD. And I actually have to thank Slayer for that, because if it wasn't for the Undisputed Attitude album, I would have never have heard what those 80s hardcore bands would have sounded like. Mm-hmm. And the first hardcore CD that I ever bought at 15 years old in 1996 was the Minor Threat complete discography. And I fell in love with it.
Minor Threat's the band that really had the most effect on my life.
I would say so too. I mean, I think when we met, you identified as straight edge, correct?
I'm still straight edge. Yeah, still identify as straight edge. Like I fucking still buy clothes and embroider X's on them all the time.
Even though Earth Crisis was the band in the 90s that led the straight edge,
more vegan revolution.
More vegan straight edge. But, I mean, Minor Threat was the band that started straight edge. I mean, they coined the phrase.
I mean he wrote I've got straight edge. Like he came up with that word choice to describe being drug free and alcohol free.
Mm-hmm. And at 15, 16, for me, when I first heard that, I identified with it because I did abstain from alcohol. Then I met my wife and I met her Irish family. Yeah, that ended quickly. Anyway,
I mean, so Minor Threat's a funny story for me because I'm a little metalhead. I'm going to these metal shows and I see hardcore kids and skinheads beating the shit out of metalheads. Mm-hmm. Like my first, 14, 15, I was like, hardcore sucks. It's so violent. Fuck hardcore. 2 things happen, which I told this story on the St. Vitus thing, but I'll tell it again. One of the things what happened was I found a cassette close to like where a car accident was. And I was like, oh, this cassette was part of this car accident. Like picked it up, put it in my Walkman, started listening to it, and it was fast, and I was like, oh, it was good. And this guy screaming, I understand what he's saying. I was like, I never really heard anything like that before, and I was like, this shit's good. Listen to it. It started to be the only thing I listened to for like 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then I was at a party And my friend was like, I'm gonna put on hardcore. And I was like, no, fuck hardcore. Those guys are assholes. Like they beat up metalheads. Fuck hardcore kids. And he put on Minor Threat, and that was the cassette, the unlabeled cassette that I was listening to.
No.
And I was like, wait, this is fucking hardcore? I'm 15. I'm like, this is hardcore? It's like this light bulb went off. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, what else is this? And then he made me a tape with like, and this is 88, the greatest hits of what 88 hardcore was about,
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. So in around that same time period, I was cool. I was listening to black, dark metal and fucking Slayer, and like the heavier the better and the more satanic the better. And I was talking to my friend's older brother, who was straight into Poison and Cinderella, and he would hairspray his hair up every day, and he put on fucking eyeliner, and he was wearing bandanas around his wrists, and he was way into the fucking hair metal. He had a fucking Jackson guitar. He was jam every day and this fucking stuff. So, and he's 4 years older than us. And I remember talking to him, and he goes, listen, he's like, you motherfuckers, you fucking metalheads, you Slayer assholes, call us posers. And I was like, yeah, you're a fucking poser. We were close, so I could fuck around with, I could mess
All
around.
right.
Sorry for cursing.
I don't care.
So,
No, it's allowed. There's no corporate sponsorship on the show, so don't worry
so
about
he
it.
goes, yeah, sorry, Denny's. So he goes, so
Denny's.
he goes, I listened to Cinderella, I listened to Warren or whatever. And he goes, they sing songs about getting drunk and riding their motorcycles and having sex with girls
Mm-hmm.
all night long or whatever. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, they do that. They're out doing it. And I was like, okay. And he goes, you listen to bands that say they have like midnight sacrifices and they all fucking chant in the fucking woods and they're out killing people and doing all this stuff. He goes, you think they do that? And I was like, no. I was like,
Well,
fuck.
well, Mayhem did, but we won't we won't touch that.
Yeah, pre mayhem.
Pre.
So I was kind of like, fuck. And I'm always like, honesty is a big thing for me. I have fucking, honesty, loyalty, sincerity tattoo from a band called Brotherhood from Seattle. That was really good in the early 90s. He kind of put me in a tailspin, and then I was listening to this hardcore stuff, and they were fucking singing about all this stuff that I'm going through, like day-to-day shit, how we need unity in the scene, how, all this stuff. And I'm just getting more psyched on the more hardcore stuff. They ain't fucking singing about Satan. They're not singing about Hitler. They're not singing about, all this stuff. I keep referencing Slayer.
There's nothing wrong with that. We love Slayer on this show.
No, I know. I love Slayer. But it was like one of those things where I just really started to push metal away. It didn't cut my hair, because then within 1 year, from like 15 to 16 to 16 to 17, everyone found hardcore in my world, and everyone shaved their head. And I was like, I'm keeping my hair long. And I just kept my hair until I was like 21.
Mm-hmm.
My hair was long, but I was shaving the sides and doing all that stuff to be a little
Mm-hmm.
punk. So that's how I got into hardcore. And then just from the amount of shows I was going to, you start to meet a lot of people. And then I started booking shows in 91. I booked a few shows, and back then no one was booking shows. There was no like, there was, but it wasn't like a super independent scene. Like I read, in a Maximum Rock and Roll, just go into a VFW hall and ask them to have a show there. So I started doing that stuff. It was like right around when I graduated high school, and like me and a couple of people would just, go to like a VFW hall and be like, hey, can we do music for, kids? There might be some dancing. And some VFW halls worked out and some didn't. And then I got into the studio stuff, and that was it for booking shows. That's where General George comes from. Like the first show I booked, someone like literally like, I booked a show and was calling people and put the whole bands together and put the venue together. It was at a studio called Split Decision in West Babylon. They had like a back room that you could put 200 people in. And I booked that show, and then we were making the flyer for it. And earlier that day, someone called me General George Patton. General George, how's everything on the Western Front or Eastern Front? And Gary from Killer Idols, who was drawing up the flyer, was like, you should put General George Productions at the top. And that coined the phrase of General George. And then later on it led to General Records. We had a small label for a little bit, and then that ended up being General Studios, and it's just General George. I really think because George Reynolds from Mind Over Matter was the other George in the scene, and he was skinny and attractive. So instead of being like the fat, ugly George, General George fit better.
I think General George is a very fitting scene because you definitely lead the charge when it comes to getting the best sound out of bands. And I have to give some love to Julie Rose. At the time when I knew her, was the lead singer, guitarist, and songwriter for Kiss the Bottle. She was the one who recommended you to me when I believe I was speaking with her and our mutual friend Jay Crawford. I said, I'm looking for someone to get the best sound out of air. And she says, well, you should speak to my friend George. He's the lead singer of 3 Years Older. And I said, oh, I've heard of them. And I think we met at over dinner one night
I
at
think so.
Johnny's.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
I
went
think
to
we
our
got
favorite
together.
we went to our favorite Chinese Japanese restaurant in Hicksville called Johnny's, and we sat down. We had a really nice dinner together. We talked music, and Aaron and I were just so taken aback with everything that you were saying, and we loved what we had heard that you recorded. And Aaron and I went home that night just saying, this is the guy. A long-standing friendship and mutual respect, and here we are today talking about it. I have to give a lot of thanks to Julie, who I think is criminally underrated as a songwriter. So it's funny that you're talking about your experience from the hardcore scene. So like, you're going to laugh when I tell you what my first hardcore show was. It was 1999, May of 1999, Irving Plaza. Motorhead was the headlining act. And opening up were the Dropkick Murphys, Hatebreed, and Scarhead. And that
Yo,
was,
that's a crazy show, though.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
insane. I didn't associate Scarhead with Ezek from Crown of Thorns. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was the same guy.
Yeah.
Because the first time I ever heard Crown of Thorns was in the '96 New York Hardcore documentary. I actually had the record.
Clockwise played, I think, maybe 2 shows with Crown of Thorns, like one in Queens, and it just because like I don't know, we love Crown of Thorns, so like we wanted to play with them. So whenever we got offered a show, it was like a weird mix. Like I think one of the shows we played with them was like a friend show because like everyone's kind of friends with each other. It was like us, Neglect, and Crown of Thorns. Clockwise, Neglect, and Crown of Thorns is like such an eclectic, range of music of like melodic hardcore from Clockwise and Crown of Thorns, and then Neglect, like doomcore or whatever.
Was it Castle Heights or Voodoo Lounge in
It
Queens?
it was in Queens, yeah. I think it might have been. No, it wasn't. Castle Heights, I don't think it was there then. This was might have been New Hyde Park,
Dublin Pub?
maybe.
That's the first show I ever played. That's the first venue I ever played. So I very sad that place is no longer there. I think it's a UFC gym right now. Yeah, how's that coming along as a business plan, you schmucks?
Well, yeah, the venues aren't doing so good either.
I know. I
so-
actually just recently purchased a T-shirt to help keep the Amityville Music Hall people employed. By the way, I really do want to drop that real quick. Go to allinmerch.com. It's $20. Just please buy a T-shirt for the Amityville Music Hall. Please take care of them. They're probably
Yeah.
one of the last few independent venues that still give music a chance out there. And looking forward to this pandemic to end so we can start opening the shows again.
Yeah, they do the right thing by the bands, and I know one of the owners, I know the manager, and I am best friends with one of the sound guys. So yeah, keep them together.
I'm glad I supported them by buying a shirt. I would have bought 2,
Yeah.
but I only had enough for 1. So that was my first exposure seeing hardcore live. And then in 2000, I'm a student at St. John's University, and I'm taking an accounting class at night. And there's an Asian gentleman in my class, tatted up sleeves. And I'm like, I know this cat. Where did I know him from? And then I heard the teacher say his name. It says Warren Lee. And I'm like, doesn't ring a bell. Then I was listening to my New York hardcore CD, and all of a sudden it said 25 to Life. Right under, Rick Healy's name was Warren Lee, bass guitar. I'm like, oh crap, that's fucking Warren. At the time, being a kid who was pretty much sheltered his whole life, I willingly admit that. When I started speaking to Warren's like, we're just regular people, man. Like we play music because it's fun for us. We don't buy into the rock star bullshit. I have to thank Warren for telling me that, because when I realized you could be a musician and not have to live this stupid rock star mentality. It's like it just felt so much easier to just say, yeah, I play music and
Yeah.
not worry about anything else.
That was the wonderful thing about the hardcore scene, or just being in hardcore bands, was like, you all supported each other, and it was like you were in the crowd for the band, either playing before you or after you, like, or just being like, oh, those dudes showed up for my show, I'm going to go out to their show. Like, you just supported each other in a way that like doesn't happen in other music scenes, and
It really
would like
doesn't.
it would bum me out that it didn't happen in other, like, it took me, because I was so immersed in the scene, through the 90s, and booking shows or helping people book shows, or like, helping build a stage in my friend's basement from milk crates and plywood. Like, it just was like I would show up and just do anything to help the show go on, or like, help do sound, or like fix a microphone, or like when I got the knowledge to do that stuff, like that like when I started kind of like, not till like towards the end of like when I owned my own studio, and I started doing like a lot of singer songwriters, which is actually like a genre of music I really like recording it. It's just like you could really kind of spread out and do interesting production stuff on singer songwriter stuff. You can get it. But and they would just be like, they're these amazing songwriters with amazing musicians, and they'd play in front of 10 people. And I'd be like, where's the band that opened? And they'd be like, oh, they leave. It's like, well, did you watch them? No. There was just no scene built up. They just wouldn't support each other. And it's kind of like, oh, you just have no, like, to me, it was like one of those, like, oh, you don't like, you can't call someone up in Philly and get a show. And they're like, no, we don't know how to do that. I was like,
it's still like
oh,
that. It was still like that up until like, last year.
I think it's just like that. I just think the hardcore scene's the hardcore scene, and it's such a subgenre that like you all want to hook each other up. But I also think that that's changed a little bit. Like, you'd listen to 14 bands, and 10 of those bands' albums were about unity and staying together and like standing strong and helping each other out. And then in the late 90s, like, you just didn't hear that on records anymore. So then no one had that drilled into them to help the next person along.
I hate to admit it, but I think once it became marketable or financially feasible to have bands like that, it was less about, unity, and less about what it started for was as a reaction to the, to what the major labels were putting out, and
the big rock machine.
Yeah. I think what happened was, once bands realized, oh, I can make a living from this, then it became less about that. I'm glad that at least I got to experience it once I started doing shows and playing like, weekend tours with my former bandmates. A lot of times we would be there early for the other bands, and we would stay late for the other bands, and they would show us the same respect. And, it kills me that that's just not there anymore. And I mean, not that it's there now, but I mean, like, it stopped being about that. And I think it's a damn shame.
Well, I think with the popularity of emo, and the fact that you could build in 300 kids in every town at every show, buying $5,000 worth of merch, like it just, like, there was money to be made there, and all the local little clubs saw that. So it was taken out of the VFW halls and put in this, like, well, here's a stage that's 3 feet high and has a PA system and a sound guy that has to get paid, and like all this stuff. And then booking agents were booking all these bands all over the country, and there are people swimming back and forth between different places. I just think like the machine of rock came in, and it's fine. A lot of people I know worked in that machine and still work in that machine, even though it's taking a pause for a year because of the pandemic. But I just think that just changed the immediacy of like when Clockwise would go out and play on the road, and we didn't even tour that much, but it was like we had to call people. Like, I got a number to some guy in Pennsylvania, and it was like I'd call him and be like, hey, Eric, we're thinking about playing Philly March 6th. Do you have anything the 7th? And you go, oh no, but I'd love to see you. There's a coffee shop I could have you play at do you mind playing with like a couple of local bands? We'd be like, we'd love to play with some local bands. And then like, and then that would be like a Saturday, and then we'd play somewhere else in Jersey on Sunday and come home. But it was like, that was all phone calls, and a month in advance or 2 months in advance. And then before you left, you'd go, hey Eric, is it still on? Be like, yeah, I still have that spot. Or you wouldn't hear from Eric. You'd show up at the coffee shop and they'd be like, nah man, we had a fight here last week and we're not doing shows here anymore. And be like, okay, I'll take a large coffee. It's like, and then you'd hang out somewhere in Pennsylvania and then go to your show in Jersey on Sunday. It just was. But now it's like a booking agent and manager and all that different stuff is like booking that same size band.
Well, it's funny because one of the things that I promote on the podcast is the idea that musicians, they're at actually an interesting point in time right now where they could do everything on their own. That doesn't require the booking agent. It doesn't require a record label. They could just, and even though I think if you want to get good, it's good to have a producer / engineer to help you get the sound that you want on record. This way it gives you an idea, let's experiment with this a little bit, which is one of the benefits that I got from working with you, which is why like I'm happy to say that now I'm recording stuff on my own at home. And if I wanted to put a band together, it's like, okay, write the songs, find like-minded musicians who just want to do it for fun, have no problem doing it on the weekends, getting together, practicing this stuff. And, we don't have to worry about the pressures of a major label because it's like, we're playing music that we love to play and, we're out performing it and we're happy. We have functional vehicles that can get us from point A to point B and back home. Although I will admit some of the fun times were when my 91 Ford Explorer would break down and we tried to fix it. But I've
rewired some taillights on a trailer that we borrowed
but the
4
truth
o'clock in the morning at a road stop in Philly. I mean, outside Pennsylvania, outside Philly.
But I think one of the problems is that as much as a useful tool social media is, it's also kind of made people lazy because you're not making those phone calls. It's like, you're messaging a venue, hey, can you got a spot for me? Yeah. X and X and X. But do they go out and promote it? No. It's like you have to go out and promote it. And then when you play and it's like, oh, you're playing for your girlfriend and 2 other people because you didn't call anyone, it's like, then they're like, well, we don't want you back here again if you're not going to bring people. It's like, I just feel like it's harder for musicians to play some places because some people just don't want to go out to a rock club. Some people have no interest in seeing live music. And for a lot of the venues, it's, for them to survive, it's only about money. It's not about getting the audience that would come see the bands that they play. So it saddens me that there's no support there from venues to bands and bands not putting in the time and effort to do what we were doing back then, which is why, here we are, an unknown band, but it's like, oh no, we're playing this stage. And your friends will go like, you're playing that stage? Oh, I got to come down and support you. Like there was excitement.
Yeah.
Like even if we were playing Dublin Pub or if we were playing Traditions over by St. John's University, or if we were playing Fuzzy's Wolf Rose in Belrose with Punch Your Face, like those were great days and people listened.
Yeah. I mean, there's, so I closed my studio in end of 2009, basically beginning of 2010. I was out of my studio. I made the second Black Anvil record, that winter. And then that making that Black Anvil record and a couple of things that had, I just didn't think I could make the quality of records that I was making because I didn't have my studio anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I was bummed out. And then towards the end of my studio, I was just like making records and making music for things that was very uninspiring, stuff that I was keeping my lights on. I made, 1 or 2 records in 2009 that I really liked, but like I was burnt out, I was burnt out of, working 100-hour weeks and not really, besides the music I was making and the people I was spending time with, not really having anything to show for it, like, almost, on the edge of being homeless all the time and not coming up with rent, and like the struggle of just living life. And then I met my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and really sort of wanted to settle down with her, and just kind of seeing the writing on the wall, the music industry. And a couple of things happened. It's funny, I'll tell the end of my music industry story before I tell the beginning of my music industry story. But
That's okay. This show's off its rocker anyways. We're just happy to have you on, bud.
This might have to be a 3-parter. I talk so much.
That's okay.
So I guess that's good for podcasts. But
it is. It's the quality of the quantity.
Yeah, I had one of my favorite mentors that I worked with on a lot of projects, and then started kind of like engineering projects he was producing and doing stuff. And I had him, he's a Grammy nominated engineer. His name is William Whitman. Grammy nominated. He's won Grammys. His platinum mix. Like, he's made so many great records in the late 70s and 80s. And then sort of took a break in the 90s, but made great records in the 90s, and was part of making these great records. And he's who I learned a lot from. I had him kind of come to me and be like, oh, do you have any records? Do you have any bands, we could do together? And I was like, man, if this amazing engineer and producer can't find work, what the fuck is out there for me? And it wasn't like I was up and coming, because I had a good client list, but like, I just wasn't making records, and I never wanted to be a famous engineer or producer. I just wanted to live comfortably and make records, and that wasn't in the cards anymore for anyone in the record industry. It just really, unless you hustled and lied to people and stole and budgeted, and oh, if you record here, I'll get you signed, I'll shop you. It's like all those lies and all that stuff was total bullshit, because no studio shopped bands, because the labels would stop listening to the studios, because you're always recording.
Right.
Your job is to record the bands, not shop the bands. So like, anytime I heard other studios, I'd be like, well, go record there. And, he'll shop you, and we'll see what happens. And none of those bands got signed or did anything.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it's funny that you mentioned that, because my wife, Erin, and I, we have a friend who was working with a Grammy nominated producer. And then when the work was done, for him to give him the rights to the masters, he had to sign a contract saying that the producer gets X amount of points for, and he's an unsigned artist. He's an unsigned artist. He's not unsigned anymore because he has a production deal.
Right.
And I think he actually just said, I'm not giving you anything when it comes to my music. And he's like, well, I'm not giving you the masters. So he decided, well, I learned enough from you, so I'm going home and I'm re-recording this stuff on my own. And now he's happy because he's doing what he wants.
A production deal is a natural thing. Like, the producer believes that they have enough, time and will spend their time and effort for a payout later. Like, I did some production deals in my studio.
You never did that with me, though. And I would have, if I had known that that was a legitimate thing, and if you had offered it.
Well, I didn't like doing them.
Mm-hmm.
So, somebody would have to come, and a manager came and said, hey, this band is, this, that, and the other thing. And, can you cut them a deal for like first right of refusal on their record and all that stuff like that. And then, I was halfway in. So I was halfway into recording this band. We were doing a 5-song EP where I was basically fronting half the studio time for, as part of the production deal. And it was going good. And, and there's a difference between when like someone's paying for something or I'm paying for it. And I remember getting in the fight with the guitarist and being like, you're going to play this again. And be like, there's nothing wrong with it. And I was like, there's this, and this wrong with it. Just fucking play it again. Because it was one of those things where it's like, it was all my time. They weren't paying by the hour. We were just doing 5 songs. So it was like, that band was sounding really good because I got to really dig in. And I told the singer he needed vocal lessons. He told me he went to vocal lessons with a good friend of mine, actually one of my best friends at the time. And she's like, that dude never showed up. And I was like, what are you doing, dude? And it ended up he was taking the money that the band was paying for his vocal lessons and buying coke, and then the band broke up. That's why I didn't do that many production deals.
I got it, but I always said that if I had made it to a point in the music industry where a major label would have found interest in me, I would have been like, okay, I only work with one producer.
Yeah.
Like that's
I
that
mean,
that
and
I,
then they would have been like, no, that's not true. Go work with this stuff. Like, I recorded a bunch of stuff for Taking Back Sunday, and Taking Back Sunday, hey, we want to use our friend who's a producer. And the guy from Victory had no idea who I was or where I worked or the quality of studio that I was at. And it was when I was at Pi. So they would have had a way better sounding first record. And then they were
hmm.
like, we got this deal. He just did a Thursday record. He gives us a good deal. And they
Oh,
went to Jersey.
I plan on
Eh,
talking to Tyler from Crippled Urn and Dr. Acula. I'm sure he has a lot of nice things to say about Tony Victory.
yeah. Well, everyone's in lawsuits right now. So,
Ev-
um,
oh, I believe it.
so I was burnt out. Whitman kind of was asking me for records and made me think about it. And also, like, I just didn't like the attitude of musicians at the time, because it was like, oh, you could fix that. And it's like, no, I don't want to fix it. I want you to play it. You've been part of that, where I'm like, hey, you got to play that again. Hey, you got to play that again. Let's make it tighter. And I hope, like, at the end of when I was done making records for people, they'd be like, I'm a better musician now. I know my songs better because you made me play them. But there's a lot of people that just didn't want to play their stuff again.
Just to interject, yes, he did that. And yes, it made me a better musician.
Yeah. And
Listen to your producer, engineer. They know what they're talking about.
yeah. And that's that's the world I came from, and like this, the records I was part of, being an assistant engineer on. So, it's towards the end, and then I was at a show, and I was talking to a friend who owned a label in Jersey, and I was like, hey man, you get any good bands? Are you excited about any of the bands? And he goes, I haven't been excited for the last 4 bands I signed. And I said, what do you mean? Like, you have a good indie label, you have good funding, you should be signing bands you're excited about. And he goes, the bands I'm excited about sit on the couch and don't fucking do anything. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, the 2 bands I signed, and this when MySpace was a thing, he goes, have 18,000, over 20,000 followers on MySpace. They toured themselves for 2 years without a booking agent. They've busted their ass. And I'm like, well, what about their music? And he goes, it's okay.
Hmm.
So I'm like, who gives a shit about a good band anymore? This band, he's going to sign. He's going to force it down people's faces. Music sucks. And then I was kind of done. I was done.
I've had that similar
Being a
issue with
professional,
musicians.
being a professional engineer producer, I was done. I
I,
left the industry.
I don't blame you. I mean, as a musician, I think I just got kind of jaded with certain people. I remember that at the time I was playing an Epiphone Les Paul. Now, I don't have enough to drop 3 Gs on a Les Paul custom.
Yeah, I have
And
I have
to
3 Epiphones behind me. I love them.
nothing wrong with them. I was happy with playing it because I was able to get the amp and get the pedals. There we go. Nice pan of George's guitars. And as you can tell, I have my 5-string Ibanez X Series bass and my Dean Vendetta, which is a neck through and plays beautifully.
Deans make good guitars.
I know. I can't believe
They made
Mustaine's leaving Dean now.
they made some bad guitars that were like under $500, and they got a bad name, probably like 90s, but they make some quality stuff.
They do. I really like their
recorded
Vendetta series. I was buying budget instruments. Some of the musicians that I played with, some of them are like, I don't care. He needs a $3,000 guitar. He's not worth his weight. I'm like, really? Let me hear you play something.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, all right. To me, it's like when I got together with musicians, do we get along as people? Number 2, can we get along as songwriters? And as long as for me, they met those 2 curriculum, I was happy with it. I don't think it was self-sabotaging of me, but this is the problem that I had with staying in a band too long, was because nobody was getting their priorities straight. It was like, okay, we're not rock stars. We're not trying to be rock stars.
Yeah.
We're trying to write good songs. We're trying to put on a good show. We're trying to, get good time in the studio. And it just seemed like, with the exception of like a handful of musicians, I would say about 25% of them that I could get along with it. You had the other 75% who were dicks about it. And
Yeah.
it's probably the reason, and people could say, well, if you failed as a musician, you have to blame yourself. I'm like, all right, number one, just because I never signed to a major label, I don't consider myself a failure as a musician, because I'm still doing it and I'm still loving it. And because I don't have the pressure of needing it to be able to put food on the family's table, I enjoy it that much more, which
Yeah.
is the point that I try to get across with the podcast, is telling people you don't need to succumb to the pressures of what industry types, you don't have to worry about what they say. It just kind of freaks me out that here we were at the tail end of bands getting signed when it meant something. And now it's like, I'd rather listen to, local talent who's doing music that they love doing. And I would only want to work with people who enjoy doing what they're doing and find something of value in me, and it's reciprocated. Now that I know that you're still, recording bands
Yeah.
once this pandemic is over, oh, trust me, I'm going to be dropping your name and be like, no, get this guy. So
For years, I didn't do anything. I did some, like mastering, helped some friends out, and did some mixing and stuff, or would show up at the recordings and kind of like give pointers and stuff.
mhm.
Help some songwriters out. Currently, I'm a broadcast engineer. I manage a broadcast engineering department for a major company. We mostly deal with sports, but it's all technical, and I have a strong technical background from wiring studios and restoring vintage gear and all that stuff. Like early on in my recording days, I learned a lot about wiring and reading diagrams and doing soldering and all that stuff. So like being a broadcast engineer, which is all video and hardly any audio, I took to it naturally. But I really missed the creativity of creating music every day. Like I had a hard time with it, to the point where like I tried to write a movie script. I was like coming up with all this different stuff just to be creative, just to
Mhm.
feed that creative sense. And then just in the last 3 years, I was like, you know what, I'm going to set some studio stuff up in my basement, and kind of set up a little area where I could mix and maybe do some guitar overdubs and stuff. And I started a record a little bit too long for how long it took to finish, but thanks to the pandemic, always wanted to work with my friend Joe Rubino, who was in Tension, dearly departed. He was a bass player in Dearly Departed.
I
I
remember
just
Dearly Departed. They were a really
always
good band.
They were really good. He's a really musical bass player, kind of playing hardcore and stuff like that. And his new band, I mean, they're 4 years old, but called the Ice Cold Killers. I was like, man, if you guys ever want to record, let me know. And he was like, let's do a record together, because he always wanted to record with me. And I was like, sick. So we started this record. He was going to be EP at first, and then like him, he writes songs like crazy. So then he went back to the studio, recorded more songs, and he went back to the studio, recorded more songs. So now it's a full length, and I'm just finished mixing it, and it's going to be released in May. Probably one of the proudest records I've worked on. So I'm excited about that. So I'm still doing music, and I'm still doing production, and it is nice to be in a studio and like build tracks with people and build songs together and come up with tone, and like it feels great. But I'm a hobbyist at this point.
By the way, if anybody wants to hear what that song is, it's available on iTunes. The band is called the Ice Cold Killers. The name of the single is We're the Enemy. So I suggest if anyone wants to hear it, check it out.
That's a little single that we dropped early in fall.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Music is Live podcast. I hope you enjoyed my interview with George, either by watching it on YouTube or listening to it on various platforms. Tune in to me weekly with Wayne and Greg on Rat Salad Review Network. And whenever I have a chance to upload new content of my podcast, you will see it here. You will hear it on, well, wherever you can download all of your fine podcasts. Anyways, real quick, big shout out to Wayne and Greg, my buddies over at Rat Salad Review, and also to Eric and James over at Beyond Bushido, Vieira Vault with Ralph Vieira, good old Dr. Fuck, who is making his return to the Rock and Metal Combat podcast, or should I say the resurrection of the Rock and Metal Combat podcast with Wadzilla himself, Ian Wadley. Looking forward to that. And also a big shout out to Aaron and Chris over at Decibel Geek. Anyways, remember, all art is valid, and if there's one thing I learned being in the hardcore scene growing up, it is better to be hated for who you are than to be loved for who you are not. Just remember that. All right. Cheers. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care.